The RPG didn't boom. It snapped, like a dry branch inside Elena's ear. The world tilted. She hit the irrigation ditch hard, mud filling her mouth. Tinnitus screamed white noise, thick as cotton. She dragged PFC Chen down by his vest. Blood was bright on his leg. Standard Trauma. But the air was wrong. Not just cordite. Under the burning rubber, something sweet and sharp hit her nose, like garlic rotting in the sun, and the smoke drifting over them wasn't grey. It was pale, sick, yellow. Gravity was the only thing making sense. Eleanor lay flat in the sludge, the taste of copper and wet earth coating her tongue. Her vision swam a kaleidoscope of beige dust and black smoke. Her inner ear signaled vertigo, a side effect of the concussive wave that had just turned the lead Humvee into scrap metal. She forced a swallow. Her throat clicked dry. She checked her limbs. Fingers moved. Toes moved. No pain yet, which meant either she was fine or the shock hadn't worn off. She focused on the weight of her plate carrier pressing into the mud. That was real. The heat radiating from the burning vehicle 5 meters away was real. It cooked the skin on her left cheek. Eleanor crawled. Her knees sank into the muck. She reached Chen. He was thrashing. A fish on a deck. Boots kicking up sprays of dirty water. She pinned him. Not with words, but with body weight. She drove her knee into his groin crease. A mechanical lock to stop the movement. Melek, he screamed. The sound was thin, filtered through the high-pitched whine in her ears. Elena didn't look at his face. She looked at the data. Right thigh. The uniform fabric was dark, saturated. The blood wasn't spurting in a jet that would be arterial high pressure, but it was pooling fast. Dark red. Venu, or a deep muscle tear, hitting a major branch. The femoral artery was the threat. She didn't guess. She reached for her shears. The canvas of his pant leg resisted, then tore with a ripping sound that felt too loud. The wound was a jagged mouth. Muscle, exposed. Debris embedded. She ignored the gore. She assessed the flow rate. Too fast for a pressure dressing. Tourniquet, she said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command to her own hands. She ripped the CAT tourniquet from her center chest rig. The Velcro tore with a harsh tearing sound. She looped it high on the thigh, shoving it up into the groin, bypassing the pocket debris. Stop moving, she hissed. She threaded the strap, pulled. The nylon hissed through the buckle. She yanked it until the slack was gone, until the strap bit into the meat of his leg. Chen howled. Araf, animal noise? She ignored it. Empathy was a luxury. Mechanics saved lives. She grabbed the windlass rod. Plastic. Black. Textured for grip. She twisted. One turn. The skin under the strap bunched and turned white. 2 turns. The muscle compressed against the femur. Chen's hands clawed at her armor, fingernails scratching the ceramic plate. 3 turns. The bleeding stopped. Just like that. Physics winning over biology. She locked the rod into the plastic clip with a sharp mechanical snap. A shadow fell over them. PFC Reyes slid into the ditch, rifle traversing, eyes wide and white in a face masked with dust. He looked at Chen, then at Elena, small and covered in muck. We need a medic, Reyes yelled, looking past her, scanning the smoke for a man. Another voice, harsh with adrenaline, spat from the dust cloud. Where's a real medic? The words landed harder than the debris. Elena didn't look up. She grabbed a marker. She wrote 1410 on the time strap. Her handwriting was jagged but legible. I.S., the medic. Cover her. Sergeant Thorne's voice was gravel and iron. Thorne fired a burst over the berm. The brass casings rained down. Hot metal, making a rhythmic pinging sound off Elena's helmet. She checked Chen's distal pulse. Gone. Good. The limb was isolated. She wiped her hands on her pants. Slick blood, turning into a sticky paste as it mixed with the dust. She looked up then. The wind shifted. That smell hit her again. Garlic. Onions. It defied the logic of the ambush. It wasn't the copper tang of blood or the sulfur of cordite. It was organic, domestic, and wrong. She looked at the smoke. It wasn't billowing black from diesel fuel. It was drifting low, hugging the ground. Apal, translucent, yellow mist. It moved like oil on water. Elena's stomach tightened. Not fear, recognition of an anomaly. She wanted to call it in. She wanted to verify. But the machine gun fire chipped the mud brick wall above her head, showering them in red clay dust. The threat was ballistic right now. The chemical data point was filed away, buried under the immediate need to not get shot. The squad collapsed into the compound, like water draining into a sinkhole. Mud brick walls rose on four sides. 12 feet of baked clay that offered cover, but sealed the exit. Thorne kicked the heavy wooden gate shut. He dropped the crossbar. It fell with a final "Domlag thud." Elena dragged Chen the last 5 meters. His boot heels left deep furrows in the dry earth. She propped him against the north wall. The only shade in the kill box. The air inside was still and hot. An oven trapping the smell of old straw, goat dung, and the fresh metallic tang of blood. Outside, the volume of fire increased. Rounds chewed at the clay exterior with a steady thwack sound. Dust puffed from the impact points on the inside surface. The walls were thick, but they weren't infinite. They were eroding. Eleanor leaned back against the wall, her lungs burning. She checked her perimeter. 8 effectives. 2 walking wounded. 1 litter case Chen. The courtyard was a rectangle of dirt about 20 meters by 15. Too small for a helicopter. Too narrow for a vehicle turn. Perfect for a grave. Elena did the math. It was a habit. A way to force the chaos into columns and rows. Ammo. Wed. PFC, Reyes shouted. The sound of his knuckles cracking loud in the brief lull. I'm down to 2 mags. Water. Half-contains. Medical. She checked her aid bag. Pressure dressings. 2 more CRT tourniquet. 1 saline bag. Morphine sirette. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Then the radio on Thorne's chest crackled. Static ate half the words. But the message punched through the interference. QRF. Negative. Blocked. IED. Main supply route. Grid locked. The operator's voice was flat. Detached. Speaking from a secure room miles away. Thorne stared at the handset. He didn't curse. He just looked at the sky. Then at the men. Copy, he said. We hold. Ow. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. No extraction. The timeline just stretched from minutes to unknown. Elena watched Thorne. He turned to the squad. His eyes swept over them, stopping on her. There was no warmth there, just calculation. He was counting rifles. She wasn't a medic anymore. She was a trigger finger. Elena felt the weight of the M4 carbine slung across her chest. It was heavy, a cold, dead weight against her ribs. She pulled it around. The polymer grip was slick with sweat and the residue of Chen's blood. Her fingers slid when she tried to check the safety. She wiped her hand on her thigh. It came away, streaked with mud. Her fine motor skills were degrading. The adrenaline dump was peaking, leaving her hands with a high-frequency tremor. She couldn't stop it. She needed a reset. She reached into her shoulder pocket. The foil wrapper crinkled loud in the silence. A sharp, artificial sound. She shoved the piece of cinnamon gum into her mouth. She bit down with a sharp crunch. The burn was immediate. Artificial. Chemical heat exploded on her tongue, cutting through the taste of dust and bile. She focused on the flavor. The heat focused her mind. It gave her a single point of sensory input that she could control. Chew. 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 Her breathing slowed. The tremor in her hands damped down. It wasn't gone, but it was manageable. Thorne watched her. His Yavset. He didn't say it, but the look was clear. Do your job. If you can't shoot, they're oldie. Thorne started barking sector assignments. Vos. Take the east corner. Reyes. Watch the roofline. Elena moved. Her legs felt heavy, like she was wading through water. She took her position. She nestled the rifle stock into her shoulder pocket. The sights bobbed slightly. Shadows were lengthening across the courtyard. The sun was dipping, taking the light with it. Beyond the wall, the shouting had changed tone. They weren't just suppressing anymore. They were maneuvering. Elena looked at the heavy wooden gate. Barred. Locked. The only way out was the way they came in. And that way was a kill zone. She looked at the sky. It was turning a bruised purple, and, drifting over the wall, descending with the cooling air, was a wisp of that pale yellow haze. It settled in the corners of the compound, silent and heavy. The smell of garlic intensified, thick and cloying. They were in the box, and something else was in here with them. The sun dipped lower, bleeding orange light across the western wall. It was the golden hour, the photographer's dream, and the rifleman's nightmare. Long shadows stretched from the base of the mud brick perimeter, creating dead zones where the eye couldn't trust the shape of things. Elena scanned her sector. The optics of her M4 bobbed slightly with her pulse. She forced herself to breathe through her nose, filtering the dust. Movement. It wasn't a tactical advance. It was a surge. Figures appeared atop the eastern wall. Silhouettes cut from black paper against the dying light. No uniforms. Just shapes with AKs. Contact front. Thorne roared. The world exploded into noise. The rhythmic crack thump of incoming rounds hitting the clay wall was deafening. Dust spouts erupted like geysers. Elena's brain skipped a beat. The training kicked in, but her body was half a second behind. She swung the muzzle toward the nearest silhouette. He was vaulting the parapet, a dark mass of momentum. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Hardy bang. Dust kicked up 2 feet to the left of the target. Miss. The realization hit her harder than the recoil. She had pulled the shot. She had jerked the trigger instead of squeezing it. The target landed in the courtyard. Boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. Weapon coming up. He was 20 meters away. If he fired now, she was dead. Panic flared in her chest. Hot and sharp. Her hands wanted to shake. Her vision tunneled. Control. She forced the mantra into her mind, overriding the lizard brain's screaming run. Breathe. Squeeze. Don't pull. It was a whisper, a prayer to the mechanics of marksmanship. She reacquired the sight picture. The red dot settled on the center of the dark mass. She exhaled. She applied steady pressure to the trigger. Bang. Bang. The double tap was clean. The figure crumpled. Momentum. Arrested by physics. He hit the dirt and didn't move. She swung to the next target. Squeeze. A sickening metallic grind vibrated through the polymer stock. Elena tilted the weapon, keeping her eyes up. Stovepipe. The brass casing hadn't ejected fully. It was caught in the ejection port, like a broken finger, blocking the bolt from closing. Sand and frantic cycling had fouled the action. Incoming fire chipped the wall inches from her helmet. Concrete dust stung her cheek. She didn't freeze. She moved into the drill. Slab. Her left palm hit the bottom of the magazine hard. Seating it. Pull. Her hand ripped the charging handle back. The spring tension fought her, gritty with sand. Observe. She watched the jammed casing spin out, glinting in the sunset. The chamber was clear. Release. She let the bolt fly home with a heavy mechanical clack. A good sound. En tap. She tapped the forward assist. Squeeze. She fired. The weapon cycled. The rhythm returned. Controlled bursts. The wave broke against the wall of fire. Momentum shattered. Silence returned, but it wasn't quiet. It was just the absence of gunfire. Elena lowered the weapon. The barrel was hot enough to radiate heat through her gloves. Smoke drifted from the muzzle, thin and grey. Her body caught up with what her mind had done. The adrenaline dump hit her stomach like a physical blow. Saliva flooded her mouth, thick and sour. She bent double, clutching the rifle with one hand, and heaved. Nothing came up but bile, and the taste of cinnamon gum turned bitter. She gagged, eyes watering, gasping for air that smelled of copper blood and burning propellant. Her hands were shaking now, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that rattled the metal components of the rifle. She wiped her mouth with the back of her glove. It came away smeared with mud and saliva. She looked at the body 20 meters away. A personne. Now, just geometry in the dirt. She swallowed the next heave. She stood up. The job wasn't done. Night had fully fallen, bringing a sudden biting chill to the desert air. The compound was a pool of ink and shadows, illuminated only by the faint red glow of tactical lights. Thorne and Reyes dragged a shape across the courtyard. The man wasn't fighting. He was limping, one leg dragging through the dust. Prisoner? Torn-backed. Vance. Check him. Make sure he doesn't bleed out before intel gets here. Elena moved. Her legs felt stiff, the adrenaline crash leaving her muscles heavy. She knelt beside the prisoner. He was young, maybe early 20s. Tariq. He wore civilian clothes, a loose tunic stained with oil and dirt. His right pant leg was soaked dark. Elena cut the fabric. A through-and-through gunshot wound to the calf. Clean exit. Not arterial. She reached for a pressure dressing. Horstil, she said, her voice flat. Tariq didn't look at his leg. He didn't look at the gun pointed at him. His eyes were wide, fixed on the sky above the northern wall. He was trembling, a continuous fine vibration that shook his whole frame. Elena wrapped the bandage. Efficient. Tight. She checked his pulse. It was racing tachycardic. Easily, 140 beats per minute. Too fast for a leg wound. She looked at his face. He was sweating. Despite the cold, his hands kept flying up to his neck. His face. His arms. He rubbed his skin obsessively, scratching, as if something was crawling on him. Mask, he whispered. The word was broken, accented. Please. Mask. Elena paused. You don't need a mask. It's just dust. He shook his head violently. He pointed toward the north, where the pale yellow haze still lingered, glowing faintly in the moonlight like a chemical bruise on the horizon. Not dust, he rasped. The cloud. It eats. Elena frowned. She checked his pupils. Dilated. Shock? Drugs. But the fear seemed specific. He wasn't afraid of them. He was afraid of the air. He reached into his chest pocket. Eleanor tensed, expecting a weapon. He pulled out a small laminated photo, a little girl with dark curls. He clutched it, then checked his skin again. Elena finished the dressing. She wiped her hands. The smell hit her again. Faint, carried on a shifting breeze. Garlic. Onions. Sharper now. It tickled the back of her throat. Tariq smelled it too. He squeezed his eyes shut. Why? He asked. His voice gained a sudden, jagged strength. He looked at Elena. There was no pleading in his eyes now. Only a hard, diamond-like accusation. You come here, he said. You bomb our weddings from the sky. We defend our soil from the ground. Who is the invader? The words landed like a slap. Verbatim. Precise. Elena stopped. She looked at him. The question hung in the cold air, stripping away the tactical justification of the last sow hours. She wanted to argue. She wanted to talk about the RPG, the ambush. But the garlic smell was in her nose, and the kid was shaking because he thought the air was going to kill him. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She stood up, pushing the moral weight down into the same dark box where she kept the fear. Secure him, Elena said to Reyes. Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. Reyes nodded, his knuckles making a distinct cracking sound as he adjusted his grip on his rifle. She walked away, toward the perimeter wall. She needed distance. The wind gusted. The smell intensified for a second. A waft of rotting onions then faded. Eleanor rubbed her chest. Her lungs felt tight. Psychosomatit, she told herself. Just stress. But she looked back at Tariq. He was curled into a ball, jacket pulled over his head, trying to filter the air through the cheap fabric. He wasn't acting like a combatant who had lost a fight. He was acting like a man trapped in a gas chamber. Elena reached for her canteen. She took a sip. The water tasted like plastic and iodine. It didn't wash away the garlic taste. Something was wrong. The pieces, the yellow smoke, the smell, the blisters she hadn't seen yet, but could almost feel were arranging themselves into a picture she didn't want to see. The mirror had cracked, and she was starting to see the monster. The world had lost its colour. When Elena flipped the PVS-14 monocular down over her left eye, reality collapsed into a single grainy spectrum of green phosphor and black static. Depth perception vanished. The mud brick walls, the sandbags, the bodies. Everything was flattened into a two-dimensional glowing canvas. She adjusted the focus ring with a quiet zip-zip sound. The grain sharpened. The silence of the desert night was a lie. Through her Peltor headset, the auditory landscape was magnified. The wind hissing over the parapet sounded like static interference. The shift of a boot on gravel sounded like a landslide, but the loudest sound was her own breath. Ah, ah, ah. It washed inside the boom mic, wet and animalistic. A constant reminder of the biology trapped inside the gear. She checked her hands. Through the night vision, they were ghost hands. Pale green claws gripping the black polymer of the rifle. The cold had seeped through her gloves, numbing her fingertips. But the adrenaline kept a low-level hum vibrating in her chest. She wasn't shivering from cold. She was shivering from the anticipation of the next spike. Contact. Thorne's voice crackled in her ear. No shouting this time. Just a flat statement of fact over the comms. Elena saw them as heat signatures before she saw them as men. White-hot blobs moving against the cooling background of the desert floor. They weren't rushing the wall like the first wave. They were bounding, using the terrain. Professionals, or desperate men who learned fast. Elena's analytic brain took over. Range, 100 meters. Wind, negligible. She mounted the rifle. The red dot of her optic was a starburst in the green field. She didn't spray. She remembered the training. Controlled pairs. She acquired a target. A torso rising from a dip in the ground. A crisp, mechanical click sounded as the safety went off. Squeeze. The rifle cycled with a heavy crack thump. The recoil impulse drove the stock into her shoulder pocket. The brass ejected. A flash of white heat in the NVG before disappearing into the dark. Squeeze. Second shot. The target dropped. No drama. Just a erasure of a heat signature. She scanned. Breathe. Target 2. Squeeze. Squeeze. It was rhythmic. Clinical. It was like operating a machine that converted copper and lead into silence. A round snapped past her head, close enough to feel the pressure wave. She flinched, ducking below the mud brick line. Dust rained onto her helmet. She popped back up. A figure had breached the outer perimeter, 30 meters out. He was screaming something, but the sound was drowned out by the volume of fire. Elena put the dot on his chest. She fired. The round hit. She saw the impact through the phosphor grain, a sudden mist of fluid that glowed white for a split second. The man didn't fall immediately. He stumbled, dropped to his knees. Then she heard it. The distance was close enough. Or the night was quiet enough between volleys. A wet, bubbling sound. Echoagle. Like a straw sucking the bottom of a cup. A sucking chest wound. The sound pierced her dissociation. It wasn't a target anymore. It was a pair of lungs filling with fluid. It was a physiology failing. The medic part of her brain screamed pneumothorax. Needle decompression. Seal the box. The rifleman part of her brain froze. For 2 seconds. She wasn't a soldier. She was a healer watching a patient drown in his own blood, and she was the one who had opened the tap. The man tipped forward. The bubbling stopped. Elena gasped, sucking in a lungful of dry, dusty air. The green world blurred. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back, forcing the grain to resolve. Stay in the box. Stay in the kill box. The shooting tapered off. The second wave broke, retreating into the shadows that the night vision couldn't penetrate. Eleanor stayed on the wall, her rifle traversing the empty desert. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Cease fire, Thorne said. He walked down the line, checking his men. He stopped at Elena's position. In the green glow, his face was a mask of shadows and grain. but she could see his eyes. He looked at her rifle, smoking slightly in the cold air. He looked at the empty casings scattered around her boots. He didn't praise her. He didn't ask if she was okay. Vance, he said. His voice was low, devoid of the skepticism that had been there so hours ago. Check your ammo. Redistribute if you're low. Stay sharp. He moved on. It wasn't warmth. It was validation. He wasn't treating her like a liability anymore. He was treating her like a weapon that worked. Eleanor dropped her magazine. It was light. Empty. She fumbled for a fresh one. Her fingers brushed the scar on her arm. The pain was distant. She looked east. The horizon was greying. Dawn was coming. The night vision would be useless soon. And with the light, they would see what the yellow haze had actually done. Morning didn't break. It bled into existence. The sky turned the colour of a bruised purple, fading to a sickly grey. The cold of the desert night evaporated instantly, as the sun crested the dunes, replaced by a dry, hammering heat. Then, the sound, a low rumble, growing into a mechanical roar. Dust plumes rose in the west. The convoy, 3 MRAPs, and a heavy truck, pushing through the sand like armoured beetles. They didn't look like saviours. They looked like machinery. No flags waving. No music. Just the grind of diesel engines and the crunch of heavy tyres on rock. Elena stood by the gate, her body feeling like it was made of lead and broken glass. She hadn't slept. The adrenaline hangover was a physical weight on her shoulders. The lead vehicle halted. Doors hissed open. Soldiers poured out clean uniforms, shaven faces, eyes bright and alert. They looked like a different species than the dust-caked, hollow-eyed survivors inside the compound. Lieutenant Blackwood stepped out. He was tall, his uniform pressed, his face a mask of irritation rather than concern. He looked at the mud walls, then at Thorne, then checked his watch. "Load them up," Blackwood ordered. "We're behind schedule. Intel wants the prisoner at FOB Zulu by 0900. End quote. Elena moved. Autopilot. She directed the litter teams. Watch the leg. He's stable but dehydrated. She helped Reyes lift Chen onto the truck. Reyes' knuckles were white on the stretcher handles. The cracking sound lost under the engine noise. Chen was groaning, drifting in and out. As the sunlight hit his face, Elena stopped. His eyes were swollen. The lids were puffed up like dough. Red and angry. He was blinking rapidly, tears streaming down his cheeks. "My eyes," he mumbled. "It burns. Ellie, it burns." Elena frowned. Dust d'irritation. Maybe. Then she went to Tariq. The prisoner was huddled in the back of the second MRAP. He was handcuffed. Silent. Elena checked his dressing. Then she saw his neck. 3 blisters. They were the size of coins, fluid-filled. Translucent bubbles rising from the skin just above his collar. The skin around them wasn't just red. It was angry. A deep, chemical violet. They weren't friction burns. They weren't sun blisters. Elena's stomach dropped. She grabbed his wrist. More blisters forming between his fingers. "Eyes," she commanded, tilting his head back. "Swollen. Well, just like Chen." The wind shifted. The smell returned. No longer faint. Garlic. Onions. But now, beneath it, the smell of fresh earth geraniums. The data points clicked into place. It wasn't a guess anymore. It was a diagnosis. Elena stepped back, her heart rate spiking. She scanned the gear piled near the gate, the detritus of the initial ambush site that Thorne's men had recovered. A pile of vests, helmets, and shredded packs. She saw something caught in the webbing of Chen's torn plate carrier, a jagged piece of metal. She pulled it out. It was heavy, denser, not aluminum, steel. It was coated in a thick, orange rust, deep corrosion that spoke of decades, not days. She turned it over in her gloved hand. Stamped into the metal, barely visible through the oxidation, were characters. Z88. Syriac. Elena's breath hitched. She looked at the blisters on Tariq. She looked at the pale yellow haze still drifting in the valley floor, heavy and low. She looked at the rusted fragment. RPG. Impact. Old cache. Rupture. Low vapor pressure. Blister agent. Mustard gas. Or. Louisite. Legacy munitions. Soviet era? The dud RPG hadn't just failed to explode. It had cracked open a nightmare buried for 30 years. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Vance? Get in the vehicle." Lieutenant Blackwood's voice cut through her paralysis. He was standing by the lead MRAP, hand on the door. "We are moving. Now." Elena looked at the truck. It was a sealed system. Air conditioning. Recirculation. If they put Tariq and Chen, off-gassing chemical agents from their skin and clothes, into a sealed metal box with the rest of the squad, it wouldn't be an evac. It would be a gas chamber. The AC would cycle the agent, concentrating it. Everyone inside would be blind and coughing blood within 20 minutes. Elena dropped the fragment into her pocket. The weight of it hit her thigh. She didn't just have a theory. She had the math. And the math said they were about to kill everyone they had just saved. "No," she said. She started walking toward Blackwood. Not walking, marching. She moved past Thorne, past the clean soldiers. She moved to the space between the convoy and the gate. She planted her feet in the dust. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "We cannot load these patients. We have to stop." "How?" Elena stepped into the space between Lieutenant Blackwood and the open door of the MRAP. It was a violation of proxemics. She was 5'4". Blackwood was 6'2". But she planted her boots in the dust, locking her knees. The vehicle engine was idling a deep, chest-rattling thrum. A blast of hot exhaust hit her legs. Behind her, the interior of the truck was a dark, cool cave. She could hear the hiss of the air conditioning system. It wasn't comfort. It was a circulation pump. Blackwood stopped. He looked down at her, his face flushing a dark, angry red beneath the desert tan. "Specialist," he warned. His voice was low, dangerous. "Step aside. That is a direct order." Elena didn't move. She put her hand on the heavy armored door frame. The metal was hot. "No. Sit," she said. She didn't shout. She spoke with the flat, rapid cadence of a triage report. "If you put those casualties in this vehicle, you kill them, and you kill your crew." Entelf, Blackwood blinked, the sheer insubordination causing a momentary lag in his processing. "What are you talking about?" Elena pointed at the AC vents inside the cab. "Sealed environment," she said. "Recirculation mode. Standard operating procedure for convoy movement to keep dust out. Correct. She didn't wait for an answer. She channeled the data. The prisoner and PFC Chen are contaminated with a blistering agent, likely lewisite or old stock mustard. It has a low vapor pressure, but in a confined space with active AC, the concentration will spike within minutes. She looked at the driver, who was watching them with wide eyes. The system will cycle the agent, Elena continued, her voice cutting through the engine noise. It will pull it from their skin and clothes and pump it directly into the lungs of everyone in this box. It's not an evacuation, Sir. It's a gas chamber. It was the math of airflow. Volume divided by exchange rate equals dosage. Dosage equals death. Blackwood's jaw tightened. He looked at the prisoner, then back at Elena. He didn't see the chemistry. He saw a delay. He saw a junior enlisted soldier obstructing a field-grade officer in a combat zone. You are guessing? Vance? Blackwood snapped. We are in an unsecured zone. My priority is the safety of this convoy. We move. Now. He stepped forward. He put a hand on her shoulder, heavy, forceful, and shoved. It wasn't a strike, but it was kinetic. Elena stumbled back 2 steps, boots sliding in the gravel. Load them up. Blackwood roared at the litter team. The soldiers hesitated, looking from the lieutenant to the medic. Reyes shifted his weight. A distinct crack from his knuckles signalling the tension. Elena regained her balance. Her hand went to her pocket, feeling the jagged edge of the Cyrillic fragment. The evidence? It wasn't enough. He wouldn't look at it. Rank was overriding reason. She looked at the radio handset clipped to her chest rig. The black coil cord connected her to the encrypted net. But there was another channel, the global net, the one monitored by every unit, every listening post, every recording device in the sector. She had a choice. Option A. Obey. Chen dies screaming. The driver goes blind. She keeps her rank. Option B. Nuke her career to save their lives. She looked at Chen on the stretcher. His eyes were swollen shut now. He was trusting her. Not the lieutenant. Und Herr. Elena's hand moved. She didn't tremble. She grabbed the push-to-talk button on her chest. She switched the channel selector knob. A mechanical click sounded twice. Open net. She looked Blackwood in the eye. He saw what she was doing. His eyes widened. He lunged for her. Don't you dare. It was too late. She pressed the button. The static hissed in her ear, the sound of a bridge burning. Elena spoke. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded like a recording stripped of fear, stripped of humanity, leaving only the raw data of the protocol. Break. Break. CBRN, one report. Suspected blister agent. Request immediate isolation. The words hit the airwaves. The effect was instantaneous. It wasn't just a radio transmission. It was a command code hardwired into the nervous system of the entire military apparatus. Chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. The acronym that stops wars. In the lead, M-R-A-P. The driver slammed on the brakes, even though they weren't moving. It was a reflex. On the radio net, the chatter died instantly. Total silence. The freeze. Elena released the button. Her thumb felt numb. She had just screamed fire in a crowded theater, but the theater was the entire US Army Central Command. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. The dust hung in the air. The engine noise seemed to drop in frequency. Then, the radio exploded. Station calling break. Identify. Say again. Coordinates. All units. Hold. Set MOBB. Status. The protocol took over. The machine had been alerted. It couldn't be unalerted. You couldn't delete a CBRN-1 report. It was logged, timed, and recorded. Lieutenant Blackwood froze. His hand was halfway to Elena's radio, fingers hooked like a claw. He stared at her, and for the first time, she saw genuine shock. Not anger. Shock. She had just bypassed his authority, his rank, his command, and gone straight to the Pentagon's nightmare scenario. He lowered his hand slowly. His face went pale, then purple. You, he whispered. Do you have any idea what you just did? You just grounded this entire operation. I secured the scene. Sir, Elena said. Her knees were shaking now. A violent tremor. She couldn't hide. You are under arrest? Blackwood snarled. He reached for his sidearm not to draw, but to assert dominance, his hand slapping the holster. MEPS. Secure this soldier. That is a false transmission. He stepped toward her, looming. A physical threat. Elena didn't back down, but she flinched. Then, a shadow moved. A crisp, mechanical click-clack sounded as a bolt carrier locked home. Loud, unmistakable. Blackwood stopped. He turned slowly. Sergeant Marcus Thorne was standing 5 feet away. His M4 carbine wasn't at the low ready. It was raised. The muzzle was pointed directly at the center of Lieutenant Blackwood's chest armor. The world stopped spinning. Mutiny. It was happening. Right here. In the dust. Thorne didn't look crazy. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had done the math and didn't like the answer, but accepted it. She called it, Sir, Thorne said. His voice was gravel, calm, and absolute. Blackwood stared down the barrel of the rifle. He looked at Thorne's finger. It was straight, along the trigger guard, but the intent was lethal. Sergeant, Blackwood said, his voice cracking slightly. Put that weapon down. That is a court-martial. That is Leavenworth. Maybe, Thorne said. He didn't blink. But nobody goes in that truck until Deacon gets here. Really now. The standoff stretched. 1 second. Tfor. A lifetime. Around them, the rest of the squad stood frozen, eyes wide. PFC Reyes looked like he'd stopped breathing, his hands clenched tight on his weapon. They were witnessing the disintegration of the chain of command. Blackwood broke first. He stepped back, hands raising slightly, palms out. Not surrender. Disgust. Fine, he spat. You want to die in this hole. Fine. Mark the time. Both of you are finished. He walked away, shouting into his radio, trying to reclaim control of a situation that had already spiraled. Thorne lowered his rifle. He didn't look at Elena. He looked at the horizon, where the yellow haze was shifting, moving closer. Elena let out a breath. She felt like she'd been holding for an hour. She looked at Thorn. He had just thrown his career on a grenade for her. "Sarge." "Don't," Thorn said softly. "Just get the water. We need to wash them down. Before that cloud gets here." Okay, the yellow haze didn't roll like smoke. It flowed like a heavy, viscous liquid, spilling over the uneven terrain of the valley floor, erasing the scrub brush and the rocks. It hugged the low ground, a translucent curtain of pale sulphur that caught the morning light and turned it into a sick, bruised green. Then the curtain broke. Figures emerged from the mist. "Contact front," a soldier yelled, his voice cracking. He tracked them with his rifle, the barrel shaking slightly. But he didn't fire. His finger hovered over the trigger guard, paralyzed by the data his eyes were feeding him. They weren't bounding. They weren't using cover. They were running. Blindly. Stumbling over their own feet, arms flailing as if swimming through the air. There were 5 of them. No weapons. No tactical vests. Just men in loose, stained tunics, sprinting toward the Americans as if the muzzle of a machine gun was a sanctuary compared to what was behind them. Elena watched through the gap in the gate. She didn't raise her rifle. She didn't need magnification to see the terror. She saw what the optics couldn't show. She saw the way they clawed at their throats, digging fingernails into flesh to open airways that were already closing. The first man collapsed 10 meters from the wall. He hit the ground face first, dead weight, slamming into the hard-packed earth. He didn't try to break his fall. His hands were too busy tearing at the skin of his neck. Elena zoomed in with her eyes, bypassing the horror to get to the clinical data. Symptom 1, respiratory distress. Violent, spasmodic coughing that sounded wet and tearing, like fabric ripping inside a chest cavity. Symptom 2, hemoptysis. A spray of bright pink froth erupted from the man's mouth with every heave, staining the dust. It wasn't just blood. It was dissolved lung tissue. Symptom 3, dermal necrosis. The skin on his face wasn't just red. It was sloughing off in sheets, peeling away like wet paper where he rubbed it, revealing raw, weeping meat underneath. Lewisite, Eleanor whispered, the word tasting like ash. High concentration. Immediate shock. Their capillaries are bursting. It wasn't a war anymore. It was a biology lesson in real time. Lieutenant Blackwood stood frozen. His face, previously flushed with command, anger, was now the color of old parchment. He lowered his sidearm slowly, the weapon dangling uselessly from his fingers. He watched the enemy combatants die in the dirt, drowning on dry land. The reality of what he had almost ordered loading contaminated men into a sealed truck hit him with the force of a physical blow. He retched, doubling over, his authority dissolving, along with the lungs of the men outside. Water. Elena screamed. The sound tore her own throat, snapping the trance. Get the water cans. Now. She didn't wait for orders. She grabbed a 5-gallon jerry can from the back of the truck. The plastic handle dug into her palm, heavy and sloshing. She sprinted to Tariq and Chen. Strip them, she ordered Thorn. Cut the clothes off. Don't touch the outside fabric. Treat it like live ordnance. Thorn moved. His knife flashed, slicing through Chen's uniform. Reyes appeared with another can, his knuckles white against the dark plastic. He popped the seal. A wet, sloshing sound followed. Elena unscrewed her cap. She poured the water. It wasn't a gentle rinse. It was a deluge, cold and shocking. A wet splashing sound followed. The sound was loud and wet against the dry dirt. "Scrub," she yelled. "Use the sand if you have to. Get the oil off." She grabbed a bottle of bleach solution from the vehicle's sanitation kit, industrial strength, meant for latrines, not people. She diluted it in her helmet, her hands shaking. Improvised. Desperate. She poured the stinging mixture over Tariq's blisters. A sharp, sizzling sound followed. He screamed. A high, thin sound, thrashing in the mud. "Hold him down." She scrubbed his skin with a rag, watching the chemical violet of the burns turn angry red. Her own gloves were slick with water, and the residue of the agent. The smell was everywhere now. Geraniums and death, sweet and cloying. It coated her tongue. It burned the mucous membranes of her eyes. But she didn't stop. She was a machine, flushing a compromised system. The man outside the wall stopped moving. The pink froth settled in the dust, drying into a dark crust. Inside the compound, silence returned, heavy and suffocating. It was broken only by the wet slapping sound of wet rags on skin and the shivering of the naked men. Eleanor dropped the empty jerry can. It hit the mud with a hollow, plastic thud. She stood up. Her chest was heaving, fighting for oxygen. Her uniform was soaked with sweat and splashback. She looked at Blackwood. He was sitting on the bumper of the MRAP, head in his hands, staring at the ground between his boots. He wouldn't look at her. He couldn't. She looked at Thorne. He was wrapping Chen in a foil survival blanket. The silver material crinkled loudly in the quiet. He looked up at her. He nodded once. A transfer of respect? Elena looked at her hands. The gloves were ruined, stained dark. She peeled them off, her fingers trembling so hard she could barely grip the rubber cuffs. She dropped them into the pile of contaminated clothes. The yellow haze had stopped advancing, held back by the wind. But it was still there, waiting on the horizon. They were alive. But as Elena looked at the raw, red skin of her patients, she knew the bill hadn't come due yet. This was just the down payment on a debt that would take years to pay. For gallantry in action, Specialist Elena Vance distinguished herself by exceptional heroism while engaged in military operations against an armed enemy. The sound of water hitting stainless steel was deafening. It roared in the small space, masking the hum of the ventilation. Elena stood at the sink in the women's latrine at Ramstein Air Base. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a flickering, sickly white, that bleached the colour out of her skin and cast hard shadows under her eyes. She was scrubbing her hands. She used a stiff-bristled surgical brush. Up the forearm, past the wrist, down to the knuckles, between the fingers, under the nails. Scrub, rinse, scrub. The skin was raw, pink, and abraded. Tiny capillaries were broken. She had been scrubbing for 10 minutes, or maybe an hour. Time didn't work the same way here. The water was scalding hot, turning her skin blotchy, but she couldn't feel the heat. She only felt the friction. Disregarding her own safety, she provided life-saving medical treatment under heavy enemy fire. The citation voice continued in her head. Perfect, clean, and detached. It didn't mention the smell of garlic. It didn't mention the pink froth bubbling on lips. It didn't mention the gun pointed at the lieutenant's chest. Elena turned off the tap. The silence rushed back in, heavy and pressurized, filling the room instantly. She looked at herself in the mirror. The face staring back was older. The structure was the same, but the eyes were different. The irises seemed darker, and the focus was set to infinity. They looked through the glass, through the walls, back to the dust. She dried her hands with a brown paper towel. The rough texture hurt. Good. The pain was data. It meant the nerves were still working. It meant she was here, not there. She reached into her dress uniform pocket. Her fingers brushed the small, velvet books. The texture was soft, premium. Inside lay the silver star. They had given it to her fast. Too fast. A hush-hush ceremony in a windowless briefing room. No press. No photos. Just a colonel with a tight smile and a piece of paper that legally redefined mutiny as initiative. It was a bribe. A shiny metal gag. They accepted the CBRN report, but they buried the details. The Soviet cache became an insurgent IED factory in the official report. The blisters became thermal burns. Thorne kept his stripes, but he was transferred to a training unit in Alaska, exiled to the ice. Blackwood was promoted to a desk job in the Pentagon, failing upwards. And Elena got a medal and a quiet warning to stick to the script. She felt the ache in her jaw. Idul, rhythmic throb in the masseter muscle. She realized she was chewing. She had been chewing since the ceremony started. She spat the gum into the trash can. It fell with a soft, wet plip. It was a small, grey wad. Cinnamon. But she couldn't taste it. The burn was gone. The sugar was gone. It was just inert rubber, flavourless and cold. It didn't provide that artificial, chemical heat she had craved in the compound. That fire was out. She reached for a fresh piece from the pack on the sink. Stopped. She stared at the foil wrapper. She put the pack back in her pocket. She didn't need the artificial focus anymore. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a permanent, low-grade static in her head. A vigilance that wouldn't turn off. She rubbed her left arm. The crescent-shaped scar was there, white against the tan skin. It was an old injury, from before the army, from a childhood fence, but it felt new. It felt hot. It felt like a brand marking ownership. Reflecting great credit upon herself and the United States Army, the voiceover faded, leaving only the hum of the lights. Elena walked out of the latrine. The hallway was long, polished, and smelled of lemon floor wax and industrial cleaner. It was clean, sterile, safe. But as she walked, a phantom scent caught in the back of her throat. Faint, almost imperceptible, like a memory triggered by a ghost. Onions. She stopped. She sniffed the air. Nothing. Just lemon and recycled air conditioning. She looked at her hands again. They were clean, scrubbed raw. But she knew the yellow haze hadn't stayed in the valley. It had followed her. It was in the fabric of her uniform. It was in the metal of the medal. It was in the silence of the colonel. It was in the lie she had to live to keep Thorn out of prison. She straightened her uniform jacket. She adjusted the medal on her chest. It felt heavy, denser than lead, like a piece of shielding from a reactor core that was leaking radiation into her heart. Elena Vance started walking down the hall. Her heels clicked on the linoleum. She was a hero. She was a survivor. And she knew, with absolute mathematical certainty, that she would never be clean again.